Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. JD Vance was announced obviously as Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. Many people didn't expect this. Vance wasn't on some people's radar. He doesn't secure some kind of obvious advantage for a lot of people. He doesn't bring you necessarily the swing states that some people were hoping for, or he's not somebody from a minority group that could shore up Trump's chances to win over a certain percentage of people who don't often vote for the Republican Party. He does in some ways show you that, being a senator from Ohio and the fact that he kind of shores up some of that rust belt. He does identify with a certain percentage of Americans that are part of the Republican base, but he doesn't add to the ticket in the way that some vice presidents are meant to do. And you really have two styles of vice presidential picks. You have vice presidential picks who are chosen because they fill in some hole that the candidate is lacking. You saw this from Mike Pence when Donald Trump ran the first time. However, Mike Pence turned out to be less popular by the end of Donald Trump's administration with the evangelical Christians that he was supposed to shore up for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump actually ended up being far more popular. However, that's one strategy. The vice president brings a state, he brings a demographic, he smooths over some kind of strategic error that the candidate would have, some hole that in that candidate's appeal. The other version of this, of course, is kind of the Dick Cheney style pick of vice president, someone who's going to bring some level of practical knowledge or political cunning. Now, I think that JD Vance doesn't fit neither one of these. He does have a certain level of political cunning, practical knowledge, but I think more importantly, JD Vance represents a direction that Trump's ideology might be moving towards. Trump really doesn't have necessarily an ideology. That's one of his advantages, is that as a non-ideological actor, he often is able to choose outside the box things that wouldn't be popular otherwise, with a highly ideological, say, neoconservative establishment inside the Republican Party. He can say things about trade. He can say things about foreign wars. He can say things about immigration because he's not ideological. But eventually, the general American first principles that he's talking about do coalesce around a movement, a direction that you're going. These are the sets of things that, at least for now, benefit Americans, or would seem to benefit Americans long term. They're going to put America first. And Vance seems to fit into a lot of that. Vance has economic protectionist policies. He's somebody who resists foreign wars, at least when it comes to Ukraine, little less on Israel. I wish he was more uniform on all foreign wars as much as possible. But that is something that he generally opposes. He opposes, obviously, open borders. So in many ways, he mirrors a lot of Trump's concern and things that Trump wants to see that will better the lives of Americans. But the final thing that JD Vance did was talk about the nation as a people. And this is something that uniformly seemed to scare a lot of commentators. Now, don't get me wrong, there were commentators who had problems with him on the left and the right for many reasons. You had the Vox talking about how JD Vance was a naked authoritarian. You can see the post from The Atlantic here up on the screen. Excuse me. About how JD Vance is very dangerous because he thinks of the nation as a real people instead of an idea. You had guys on the right, like the National Review crowd, Dan McLaughlin, Eric Erickson, kind of very funnily, he commented, "Oh no, JD Vance, he shows that the Reaganites lost and the Buchananites won." Well, awesome. You don't have to sell me on the guy, but yeah, it would be great if the Buchananites had won something. However, my friend Jeremy Carl was quick to point out that Buchanan himself was a Reaganite. He worked in the Reagan administration and simply tried to hold true a lot of principles that had otherwise been discarded or mutated over time by the Republican Party, who was creating this zombie Reagan rather than anything close to the actual organic coalition of Ronald Reagan, which included the moral majority, the religious right, and many others. I think Reagan is far from the deity that many Republicans hold him up to be, but he's also obviously a president who I think ultimately did a lot of good. Being presiding over the fall of the Soviet Union, whether you're entirely responsible for that or not, is enough to go ahead and put you up there pretty high on the list of solid presidents. But Buchanan is obviously somebody who came out of that revolution, and the fact that Erickson said, "Oh well, now it's the Buchanan strain of this that is dominant." Fantastic, right? Good news. Couldn't be happy to hear this. Charles Koch, another one of these guys from the National Review, had a lot of problems with JD Vance, said he was just unelectable. Again, didn't understand the purpose of Vance on that ticket. Vance represents the possible future of the project, puts somebody behind Trump that is theoretically at least scarier than Trump for the left. And as we're going to see from many of these articles that we're going to talk about today, that what they're really scared about again is Vance's assertion that America is not just an economic zone. It's not just a collection of ideas. It's not just a propositional nation. It's a real nation. It's a real people. This is something that was very scary to both the left and the right. Ben Shapiro also, I wouldn't say was scared, but at the very least was hesitant, concerned, confused about the way that Vance posed the idea of America as a real nation. So what I want to do today is dive into a couple clips, understand a little bit what each of these people were talking about, why they opposed Vance's idea of America as an actual nation and not just a collection of ideas, not just a proposition. I also want to go ahead and explain the problems with the concept of the propositional nation. But before we do all that, guys, let's go ahead and hear from today's sponsor. Hey guys, I'm sure you know that your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. I found it super easy to use. When you wake up in the morning, you just breathe into the Lumen, and the app on the phone tells you what ratio of carbs versus fat you're burning. Then it'll give you suggestions on how to tailor your diet to improve your metabolism. I really like that it also tracks your shift before and after a workout, so you can understand how effective your exercise has been. And you can track all of your macros in the app, and it serves as a great motivator that allows you to see your results and adjust your plan to optimize your metabolism. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/Auron and use the promo code Auron to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Auron and use the promo code Auron at checkout for 15% off. So like I said, there were many people who were worried about JD Vance, scared about JD Vance, hesitant about JD Vance as the pick for Donald Trump's VP. Now the left have to demonize everybody, right? So it didn't matter who he picked. He could have picked Martin Luther King Jr. He could have picked Jesus. He could have picked Gandhi. He could have picked anybody. It didn't matter. They would have gone after him. They would have tried to destroy whoever Donald Trump had put in the vice presidential slot. But it's interesting that there was a consistent theme about JD Vance. There's a lot of things they didn't like. They talked about, his attitude, his demeanor, where, maybe he's not really a hillbilly. Maybe he didn't really grow up or all this stuff, right? They tried to denigrate his life story, everything about him. But one thing that consistently came up across both left and right, like I showed you in that Atlantic article at the beginning, was the idea that there was something dangerous about America as a nation. There is something dangerous about the idea that America is a people united together with a shared identity, a shared past, and a shared future. Specifically in the Atlantic article, they talked about how he gets rid of pluralism, how he may vaguely gesture towards pluralism, but ultimately he really wants to go ahead and create this very sinister situation where there are certain people that belong in America and certain people who don't, that kind of thing, right? And again, this was echoed through a lot of different commentators. This was a very common criticism of Vance, and his kind of assault on the propositional nation seemed to rile some feathers across both aisles. So I want to begin here with a clip from Alex Wagner of MSNBC. We're going to see that Vance and his identifying America as a place where people belong is a problem for her, of course, along with the fact that he's both white and male, the worst things that could ever exist in all of history.
Or 6 generations of his family are buried, and his hope is that his wife and he are eventually laid to rest there, and their kids follow them. And I sort of understand the idea of sharing the burial plot, but it also it reveals someone who believes that the history that the family should inherit, and indeed the history that should be determinative in the story of the Vance family, is the history of the Eastern Kentucky Vances.
So her first problem is the idea that JD Vance and his family have a history. They exist somewhere specific. They're not deracinated people. They're not people who suddenly arrived, but they have roots in the United States and have been here for a long time. And so therefore, if the Vances are going to be buried anywhere, once he and his wife eventually pass, hopefully many, many years down the road, and his children and everyone else in his family, they will be buried in a common place. Now, down south, this isn't universal to all people in the United States, I guess, but this is a very common thing for a lot of people who are connected to tradition and history. Where your people are buried matters. The graveyard where your people are buried signifies something about your identity, where you're from, where you grew up, how the land has shaped you, how your history has shaped you, how your heritage has shaped you. These are all things that matter to people who have been from a particular place, and they understand this with a certain degree of ownership. This is not new to the United States. It's not specific to like Western white culture, I guess. This goes back to many different traditions, Indo-European civilizations, including ancient Greeks and Romans, before they had kind of the pantheon we're familiar with, had a level of ancestor worship that was specifically tied to where their parents were buried, where their families were buried. It was believed that you had property rights, not because you had the right to sell that property, not for any kind of economic gain, but property rights were mainly recognized, as opposed to other traditions like certain Germanic tribes, which would often shuffle the land that someone controlled. Same thing often with, say, Russian peasantry. But in these cultures, it was tied specifically to the family and the property, because that's where your family was buried, and that's where you live. That's where, if you wanted to honor or worship, if you wanted to give offerings to dead family members, you had to be on the land where they were buried. Where the graveyard was mattered. So this is an ancient idea. This is deeply buried inside humanity. And so it's very normal for JD Vance to want his family to be buried in the same place, to carry on that tradition, to be identified not just with some random set of ideas, but saying, this is a plot of land where my people have always been, where even if we move other places, we travel, the different things about our lives change, there's a calling back to this area, because we are not just some random deracinated people.
And not the Vances from San Diego, which is where his wife is from and where her Indian parents are from. But in America, it doesn't always have to be the white male lineage that trumps that defines the family history, that branch of the tree supersedes all else. And I just think the construction of this notion reveals a lot about someone who fundamentally believes in the supremacy of whiteness and masculinity.
Yeah, see, if you have any idea of heritage, if you're familiar with the history of your family, if your family's been here more than a generation or two, and you're tied specifically to the land where your family was from, rather than, I don't know, traveling to a distant country and burying yourself or your children there when you die or whatever. If you're tied to this nation, if you're a person in a nation, then obviously evil white supremacy, right? This kind of unveils the deep bias inside JD Vance. He's a very terrible person for understanding that there is a continuity of culture and a continuity of heritage that matters. And it does a lot to define who he is as a person, who his children will be, what his nation will be. But of course, this is a huge problem, right? There, you should never favor that. You should never understand that. You should never make any connection to that. And doing so is very nefarious. Now, like I said, this bounced all over the spectrum. There were people on the left. There were plenty of people on the left who had this criticism, but there's also some people on the right who had a problem with this. I want to go ahead and bring up Ben Shapiro here, who is another person who, like I said, he's not hostile to JD Vance in this, but he just seems befuddled. They're actually, the guys in the National Review were actually more aggressively anti JD Vance. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that Shapiro is actively anti JD Vance in what he's talked about, but he doesn't seem to agree with him on certain points, including economic protectionism, the reasons for border security. It was a very strange, nuanced position. He's like, well, you should only make economic arguments for border security, which I guess will lead us into this clip, because if you only think the arguments, or if you think all the best arguments for border security are economic, then yes, maybe you would miss what Vance is trying to say here. But let me go ahead and bring up Ben Shapiro's clip.
Getting a lot of attention.
All right, so he's going to talk about Vance's speech here. So we'll play a little bit at a time, because he's going to play the speech. So you want to hear the speech and then his reaction to it. I'll say that the speech that Vance is going to give here, the clips he's going to play from the speech at the Republican National Committee, are very similar to the speech that I heard from Vance when I was speaking at NatCon 4. So there's a couple reasons for that. Probably these are familiar themes for Vance, but also I'm not sure that Vance was the pick before Trump got shot. I'll never know for sure, or I probably won't unless they come out and just say it directly. But my hunch is that was not necessarily the case. That he was one of the finalists for many of the reasons I had stated. But once Trump got shot, he recognized the importance of having a successor. You couldn't just slot Marco Rubio or Tim Scott or somebody like that in there. You needed somebody who was not just going to pick up a certain demographic or a certain state. You needed an ideological successor. You needed somebody who scared the left, so they knew that if for some reason or somehow they managed to get another guy to take a shot at Trump, there would still be somebody behind him that was maybe worse for the left. You need to get an insurance policy, basically. And JD Vance is that insurance policy on multiple levels. I know plenty of people are skeptical about JD Vance. I think he's a good pick, but this is not my apology tour for Vance. I'm not here to praise him. I want to get into the Propositional Nation part. So we will talk about JD Vance's speech, but the focus here is not necessarily going to be on him as a candidate or his actual loyalty to Trump or some kind of the MAGA movement, any of these things, though I can also talk about that. But I think the main thing that I want to focus on here is why the Propositional Nation seems to be a problem for many people, both left and right. But before we dive into that, guys, let me go ahead and play our advertisement from JobStack. Hey, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, JobStacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what JobStacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the JobStacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of JobStacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. JobStacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used JobStacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But JobStacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now, and book a call with Rolf today. All right, so like I said, Ben's going to play a little bit of this speech, and it's very similar to the one that I heard at NatCon, not just because this is a theme for Vance, but also because I think he was just selected very close to this and may not have had other remarks ready to go. But let's go ahead and hear what Ben thinks about JD Vance's speech.
Vance's speech, it's getting a lot of attention, is his point, and it was also made by the World War II veteran who spoke yesterday, that America is not just an idea, it's a homeland, which of course is absolutely true. Here is Senator Vance last night.
America is not just an idea. It is a group of people with a shared history and a common future. It is, in short, a nation. Now, it is part of that tradition, of course, that we welcome newcomers. But when we allow newcomers into our American family, we allow them on our terms. People will not fight for abstractions, but they will fight for their home. And if this movement of ours is going to succeed, and if this country is going to thrive, our leaders have to remember that America is a nation and its citizens deserve leaders who put its interests first.
Okay, now, again, I agree with everything he's saying. I'm just not sure what he's arguing against. Because obviously America is a nation.
I'll go ahead and just let Ben know what he's arguing against here. He's arguing against something that we hear over and over again, which is the idea that America is fundamentally a set of ideas or principles, that America is essentially a dream, to take the words from another famous hero of the left and modern right. Less so the left now, I guess. But the point being is it's very common for the United States to be portrayed as this place where people can come and join as long as they go ahead and adhere to an idea. It's the ideas that matter. Hence the propositional nation. We have a set of propositions that we believe in as a nation. And if you agree to those, then you are American. You can become American. Now, this idea of a propositional nation has a number of implications, many of which bear themselves out in negative ways, have a negative impact on the way that America understands itself, understands its role in the world. These are huge issues that can develop when you do not understand yourself as a nation, as a people, and instead as a collection of ideologies, a set number of academic exercises that define who you are. If you just go ahead and recite those things, then suddenly you are an American. America is much more than that, and we'll go into that in a second, but just going to go ahead and define for Ben what JD Vance is actually talking about here.
France is also a nation. Poland is also a nation. Right? When he says that America is a land, yes, so is literally every other land. That's true. And America happens to be the best land. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's the best land and it's the best nation. But why? Why? And the answer is the idea that's connected to those things. So he says that
So Ben says something here that is really untrue and gets to the heart of the problem. And I think also creates confusion for him when he's trying to understand what Vance is trying to say. He says that, yes, America is a land, but, France is a land. It's a country. There's all these other countries. There's plenty of land around. And that's just, how the world works. And so there's plenty of land. And the only thing that makes the United States the best land, it's the reason because he asserts this is the best land, but it's the ideas in that land that matter. It's the ideas that matter. No, wrong. Okay. So there's something that we need to break down first. And the first thing we need to break down is a connection that a lot of people make that is very modern. Okay. The nation state, as we understand it, the Westphalian order as we understand it, is relatively new. It's only a few hundred years old, which in the range of history is not that long. And because we are so used to the nation state, we understand these as the same thing. This gets particularly difficult sometimes, unfortunately, for Americans, because we call the regions of our country states because they used to be states. They used to be their own governmental entities. So we have a weird relationship with the word state. Normally, state means the government, and a nation means the people. And the nation and the state are not the same thing through most of history. For instance, you used to have city states. And in a lot of ways, city states saw themselves as nations. The peoples were confined only to really those who lived in or around a particular city. Your level of social organization that was possible was often only the size of a city. And so, in that case, the nation, the people, were the city, and the city and the state were the same thing. The government and the city were the same thing. The government and the people were the same thing. However, as human organization expanded, we started to get empires. And empires meant that you had one state, often one set of government that is ruling many different peoples or nations. And so the definition usually of an empire are nations, multiple nations ruled by one government, one state. Now, not to get into we don't want to get into the weeds of like, yes, in a lot of empires, obviously you had multiple sub-governments. Often peoples were governed by their traditional kings who then just kick things up to the empire. All this is true. Let's not get bogged down in that, though. I'm just trying to give us a general understanding of the problem with the idea of the nation state as we understand it right now. And so often, a king, for instance, or an emperor would govern multiple peoples that would be brought under the rule of a particular government. You often had peoples who sometimes saw themselves as individual and sometimes as one nation. For instance, Hellenic society, Greek society, originally they only saw themselves as individual nation states. The Athenian and the Lacedaemonian, the Spartan, they didn't see themselves as the same people in some ways. They were very different peoples, unless they were united against the Persians, in which case they understood that the Hellenic culture was different. They were a nation in that way. They were a people in that way. And so they bound together to defend themselves against the Persians. So this is not always a super solid concept. It's not some hard border. The idea of the nation, the people, can often shift and change a little bit. It tends to have a lot of things determine it. Of course, the heritage is a big one, but also language, religion. In fact, Samuel Huntington focuses very much on religion as the key binding agent for civilizational blocks, which I think is a reasonable point. The thing being is that the identity of nations can shift somewhat. It's not hard built on just one thing. It's not simply a relation, a familiar relation. It's not simply language. It's not simply religion. It's not simply folkways, but all of these things tend to define what a nation is. And the idea that a nation and a state, that a nation and a government are the same thing, is not necessarily true throughout most of history. It's relatively new. In fact, one of the big things that happened over, after World War I and the disillusionment of, or the dismantling of so many of these kingdoms, was to create a lot of nation states, which seemed like a good idea at the time. Every people gets its own state, and then every people has its own self-determination. The nation and the state become the same thing. You're a group of people. You'll have a common language, common heritage, common culture, common religion. You see the world the same way, and now you have self-determination because you're also a state. So that is the nation state, right? But what has happened is that now we have focused and we've created the state as the defining feature of what the actual people are. And that is, ironically, in many ways, somewhat fascist. Not to be too particular about the term, but it subordinates the identity into the state rather than the organic identity of the people. And this is something that I don't think is super healthy. This particularly becomes a problem when you try to identify the state with an ideology, with a proposition, because now what identifies you with a state or without a state is the propositions, the ideas of that state. But that's not what happens for the vast majority of other countries. A Frenchman is not a Frenchman because of his ideas, right? Someone from Japan is not Japanese because of his principles. Someone from, I don't know, Saudi Arabia is not Saudi Arabian simply because of their religion. There are plenty of people who have their religion. There's something more to this, right? And so it's not just the ideas. It's not even just the religion. There's something beyond these things that matters when you're trying to identify a people. But the problem is when you just say, well, all these other nations are just like the United States. Well, no, they're not, because you would identify those people as people from those nations. But when you get to the United States, all of a sudden the United States is special because it has ideas. Well, a lot of nations have ideas. So let's delve a little deeper into Ben's confusion here, but we'll go deeper into the propositional nation.
America's not just an idea. And of course, that's true. I think the thing that he's arguing against, and here I agree with him, I think the thing he's arguing against is this sort of abstracted idea that Joe Biden uses all the time, where he says it's not who we are. And what he means by that is it's not who the left is. Okay, the attempt to universalize American values in the sense that they can either be exported to Iraq or imported from Guatemala. That's silly. And it's
Now, I agree with Ben here entirely. He's right. That is silly. The idea that these ideas are universal, that they can be exported to a foreign nation and build that nation, like there's little Thomas Jeffersons and George Washington's running around Afghanistan or Iraq, or that we could just take any idea from another nation and bring it in with the people, and then suddenly that becomes an American idea. He's right. That is ridiculous. But the thing that Ben is saying reveals something deeper, even though he doesn't recognize it. The thing Ben is saying says something important. These ideas aren't universal for a reason, because they don't apply to everyone. If the ideas were universal, if it was just the ideas that made America the best, then you could just take the ideas somewhere else and make that country the best. So if Afghanistan or France or Ethiopia went ahead and adopted America's ideas because they're the best ideas and that's what makes America the very best land, then those would become the very best land. But he just says here that that's ridiculous. And he's right, it's ridiculous, but that does not jive with the other things that he said. He also points out that you can't just bring in ideas from other nations and then they suddenly become American. And that's true. But the reason he talks about Guatemala is he also knows that there's a lot of Guatemalans coming into the United States. Those ideas are tied to people. And what Ben is really explaining here is this very classically liberal idea that peoples are blank slates, that there's nothing particular about any group of people, that they don't carry with them any folkways, traditions, any kind of heritage, ancestry, any kind of religion, or any of these things. They don't carry those things with them. They're just blank slates. And so, the ideas are the only thing that matter, but they're not. That can't be true for the very reason that Ben Shapiro just said. He said it's ridiculous to believe that if we have the very best eyes in America and we take those very best ideas and put them into Iraq, or we put them into Liberia or something, that all of a sudden it creates a perfect nation. Just like the United States. If that was true, then Liberia would have been great, right? Because they copied so many of the ideas from the United States. My buddy Ernst Van Zel from South Africa often points to the fact that the South African Constitution has been called a masterpiece. It has the very best ideas. It makes all these amazing promises about what the country's going to be. And South Africa is still a mess because the ideas are not enough. It is not the ideas by themselves sealed away somewhere in the Constitution of South Africa or the United States that makes the country what it is. It was the people of the United States who went ahead and enshrined their way of being, their life, their understanding of who they were as a people into the Constitution. Those ideas look great because the people made them great, because the lifestyle of those people, that folkway, that moral vision, that understanding of who they were mattered. And that is what formed the country. The country is not an idea. The country is not a proposition. It's not the very best ideas. And Ben Shapiro, after saying the country is the very best ideas, turns around and says, actually, it turns out it's not, because you can't just export those ideas. That would be silly, which of course is correct. But again, it just does not jive with his original explanation of what the problem he has with Vance's speeches.
It's wrong. And I think that's what he is saying right there. But when he says that people don't fight for ideas, obviously that's not true. That's certainly not true. I mean, I'm sorry, the Cold War was a war of ideas. It turns out it was not just a war of territories.
So this one's a little more hit miss. I'll give him a little bit of this one. People do die for ideas. People absolutely die for ideas. Now, I don't think that in general, most people who went to war for either the Soviet Union or for the United States in any given conflict did so for the ideology. Like, yes, they said, oh, we're brothers, we're comrades, we're fighting for the glorious revolution of the Soviet Union. The Americans, we're fighting for liberal democracy, we're fighting for freedom. But you notice they both managed to, despite these very different ideologies in theory, fight the same enemy, which was the Axis powers, which was mainly, obviously, Germany and Italy and Japan. Despite the fact that they had radically different ideas and ideologies, they still managed to fight. And the Soviet Union lost way more people. They lost way more people. So were their ideas better? Did they care more about their ideas? Were they more dedicated to their ideas? I don't really think so. But the point is that there's something beyond those ideas that those people fought for. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found a common enemy. If their ideas are so radically opposed to each other that they later on created the Cold War, which, to be fair, was more ideological. Ben is right about that. I'll get into that in a second. But the idea that that's what they primarily fought for, I think, is just incorrect. I think both sides fought for their homeland. And whether you feel that their homelands were in danger or not, whatever, that's not the debate here. The point being is they both believed, both of those nations and the people who sacrificed on their behalf believed that their nation mattered, that their people mattered, and that the safety and freedom and future of the people that they had at home mattered. And so some of them were directly defending their homelands, and some of them were defending areas that they felt connected to, because so many of, say, people in the United States felt the connection to Europe, felt a special relationship because so many of them had come from Europe. But either way, they were most certainly not just dying for an idea. Now, the Cold War was more ideological, but again, I think this is more of an aberration. And again, to appeal to Samuel Huntington and his Clash of Civilizations theory, one of the things he points out in that book is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we started to see a return to real politics again. The politics of who are we? That was a bigger question. That was what everyone was trying to figure out. And reminder, Samuel Huntington is a very mainstream down the middle guy. It's not some radical right guy, some radical historian on the right, some way off political, reactionary thinker. He's somebody who held a chair at one of America's premier universities. So this is a guy who's well respected. But his point was the Soviet Union, the United States, they're kind of locking down the entire world around these two ideas of kind of capitalism versus communism. That was a very particular moment in history that only lasted a few decades. And then we started going back to what history has been through most of the centuries, which is more a question of who are we? What do we believe as a religion? What do we share as a culture? What is a civilization or our goals? These are the things that people really return to. And so once again, it's more about the people and the nation than it is the ideology. So it's not correct to say no one dies for an idea, but I think it is correct to say that people rarely die just for an idea. And that means that America simply as an idea is insufficient to go ahead and motivate people to go ahead and fight for the country. And in case you were wondering if that's true, check out the military recruitment right now, particularly among heritage Americans. People of European descent tend to now enter the military at a much lower level after everything that has been happening, especially them being demonized. So America as an idea is no longer sufficient to motivate them. They no longer feel part of the country. It is not of their people anymore. And so therefore they are not as motivated to defend it. The ideology itself, the ideas, the propositional nation is not sufficient to go ahead and motivate those enlistment numbers. So I think there's plenty of evidence to point out that while Ben makes somewhat of a good point there on the not just the idea, ideas are not sufficient to explain the behavior of people here. There's something much deeper in the nation.
Otherwise, it would be like most European wars, which are wars of territory. Turns out that people fight for
America fought a lot of wars of territory. Sorry, but that's just ridiculous. America fought a lot of wars of territory. Sorry, but if you think like the Spanish-American War is a war of ideology, if you think the Mexican-American War, these are wars of ideology, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah, there's some ideological window dressing on a lot of these, but America fought plenty of wars of territory. Yeah, the idea that the only war that America has ever fought is the Cold War, the one like somewhat ideological war, which never even actually broke out to a hot war between the major combatants. That's quite a bit of history that we are forgetting here.
ideas all the time. The idea is connected to the home. That's what makes America a nation.
So this is a very strange thing to say. The idea is connected to the home, and that's what makes America a nation. Again, why wouldn't that be true of any of those other nations? And if the idea is connected to this home, could it not be connected to another home? And if not, why? Why can't I take these very best ideas and connect them to another country and make that country the United States? Why can't I just take this over to Bangladesh and turn that into the United States? What is stopping me? What is the factor that I can't just export? Because I can export the ideas, but it's not just the ideas. The ideas are connected to a people. The people live those ideas. Those ideas came from those people. It is part of their tradition. It is part of their religion. It is born of their language. It is part of their heritage. These are lived experiences tied to a specific way of being. Now, JD Vance goes out of his way, correctly, in my estimation, to say that part of America has always been the ability of some people to join the United States, to join us as a people. And I know this is going to make some people angry, but historically, this is of course true. A lot of societies are very closed, but there are usually some level at which people could join societies. They could become part of a people. A foreigner might be a foreigner when they first enter in a community, and it would often take a multi-generational project to go ahead and have his family join if they wanted to. That's the big difference, right? Is today we act like you can just walk into the country, raise your hand, recite, a couple of facts about the United States, and boom, you're American. You've touched the magic soil, you've said the magic words, everything is done. But no, being part of a nation, being part of a people, again, is many things. Heritage is one of them, but it's also language, it's also religion, it's also folkways, custom. All of these things are what makes a people who they are. And so if over several generations, an immigrant is dedicated to becoming part of a new people, that can eventually happen. They often have to intermarry, they have to join the religion, they have to know the language, but most importantly, they have to live the life of the people who are in that region, the area, that nation for their entire lives, and often their children. And their children's children also have to be kind of on the outside until they eventually integrate. That's what real integration looks like. Real integration is a multi-generational project. And especially in the United States, where unfortunately we went very far down the road of this poisonous multicultural ideology. If we're ever going to come back together as a people, we will need to have some level of understanding of assimilation and integration. That will have to happen. However, that assimilation has to be to something. And it's not just an idea. It's not just a set of ideas. It is more than that. It is religion, it is custom, it is language, and it is so much more. And the only way you can do that is, again, by having a majority culture, a majority identity for people to go ahead and assimilate to. If you don't have anything to assimilate to, if America is simply a list of things that I learned in civics class that I read out loud, then you can never have assimilation. And the founding culture of the United States is undeniably both Anglo and Protestant. Now, that does not mean that everyone in the United States was Anglo or Protestant. And it doesn't mean that many people who joined later were not able to go ahead and become American despite not being Anglo or Protestant. But they had to go ahead and conform to this baseline understanding of an Anglo-Protestant United States. That is who the American people were. And that is how, even if you were, say, a Catholic coming in, you still had to understand this was going to be a Anglo-Protestant country, and it was going to go ahead and lead you in a particular direction. It was going to live in a certain way. Now, everyone, again, in the country is not entirely Anglo or Protestant. I'm a Protestant, and I'm a little Anglo, but I'm also German and Irish and Native American. These things, it's not everybody, right? Most Americans are not just those things. But that was still the core of the American identity. And if you want to go ahead and assimilate to the United States, you have to assimilate to that way of life. And slowly over time, the different parts of you that aren't, conforming to that culture do, because you get used to living in this way. That's why the propositional nation is not sufficient. It does not actually allow even immigrants to assimilate because there's nothing for them to actually join. You've destroyed the culture, telling people that all that matters is the ideology. The ideology is the only thing that defines us. And I think that's why Ben is confused here, because I think he believes in the propositional nation. And so he's like, well, it's what the left says, that that's not who we are, and that we can bring all these other things in. But he never thinks about kind of the implications of what that means. But let's play a little more here.
And I think that's what he's trying to say. I hope that's what he's trying to say. Because otherwise, I'm not sure what the exact kind of, what is he arguing against? That's really the question that I'm asking here. And I know there are a lot of people online who are taking like significant pleasure in this particular line, but it's obviously self-evident. America is not just an idea.
It's actually not self-evident. And in fact, many people in the conservative movement have been very clear that they don't think it's self-evident, that they do think that America is simply a set of ideas, that anyone can come in and join at any time. And it doesn't matter, as long as you go ahead and choose to be part of the nation, you choose the proposition, then the ideology, then you can be an American. But here's the problem with the propositional nation. And if you would like to, I'll give you the quick argument tip. I don't usually do this, but here in 30 seconds, dismantle anybody who believes in the propositional nation. When they tell you, I believe in the propositional nation. America is an idea. America is a set of principles, not a nation in the European sense or anything like that, but it's an ideology, whatever. When they say that, when they say it's a propositional nation, it's a set of principles, and anyone who goes ahead and agrees with those principles can join. The first thing you ask them is, all right, well, what if those people don't agree with those principles? What if there's someone here? What if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, I don't believe in the principles anymore? Can I deport her immediately? What about all the blue-haired libs who don't agree with Ben on the principles of the United States? Can we deport all of them? Anybody who comes into the country and brings another country's flag, can I immediately deport them? Like, if anybody changes a little bit of their ideology to no longer hold to the proposition of this nation, do we just expel them? And the answer will uniformly be no, because one of our principles is that you have free speech and you have freedom of conscience and you can choose your ideology, you can choose your belief system. So you have a contradiction inside the heart of the propositional nation. You can't have a propositional nation and say, well, the nation is just a set of ideas, but also say, but one of those ideas is anybody can go ahead and crap on those ideas, discard these ideas at any time, but they still get to hang out and be here. Because what you're saying is, well, basically everyone's an American all the time. The entire world is just they're just potential Americans who just haven't crossed the border yet, because they don't need to hold the ideology of the United States. And if they manage to hold it for 10 seconds and raise their hand and then immediately go back to living their lives with the beliefs and the principles and everything else of the foreign nation, well, it doesn't matter because they're already American and they're still here. And this is a real problem, because that is actually happening in the United States. We have areas in this country where the flag is being switched basically to the Somali flag because of the number of people being imported into that area who still hold the identity of the countries they came from. And when you are only a propositional nation, when you're a nation is just an idea or just a land with the best ideas, then you have no idea what's happening to you when you are being replaced. When the federal government, as JD Vance pointed out in his speech later in that speech, brings in to a town of 60,000 people, 20,000 Somalis. So 60,000 people live in the city, and they drop 20,000 Somalis into that city. I don't care if every one of those people loves the American dream, which they don't, to be clear. That's not who got dropped there. But every one of them wholly holds to every idea of the propositional nation. That entire community is fundamentally transformed. Because even if those people do hold to those ideas, they have not lived them. They have not lived the experience. They have not become part of the community. It is not their folkways. It is not their traditions. It is not their culture. It is not their language. It may not be their religion. It is not their shared moral vision. It certainly is not their shared history and heritage. These are all things that actually make a nation what it is. And instead, you're just like, well, maybe they've got they read the Constitution one time. They're great. Good to go. And 10 minutes later, if they say, oh, well, I don't agree in the proposition, they still get to stay here forever. The propositional nation is a farce. No one actually believes in it. If you ask anybody what makes a people outside of the United States, they will not tell you its ideas. And if they tell you its ideas inside the United States and you ask them, well, what happens if someone stops believing in the ideas? They will immediately tell you, oh, well, our principles say they have to be able to stay here and disagree with us. So nothing about this is correct. And again, if we had a nation that was defined by our ideas and adherence to those ideas, that ironically would be the most fascist nation available, because it would subordinate identity and community to the ideology of the state, which is basically like the definition of this totalitarian central government that we don't want. So the idea that everyone needs to adhere to this ideology, this proposition, to maintain their citizenship, to maintain their membership in the community, is itself a terrifying and very anti-American way to understand us as a country, as a nation. Let's play the rest here just in case.
Lots of things are just an idea. Right? Quantum physics is just an idea. It's not a nation. It's not a home. And obviously that's true. Obviously that's true. But the point of the American idea is even stated by JD Vance there, which is you can join. If America were only a nation, or if it were only a home, how would you join it?
Again, that makes no sense. Throughout history, plenty of people have joined nations. Plenty of people have joined homelands. Yes, homelands were for specific people, and it was difficult. And often an outsider was not welcome right away. But there are plenty of examples throughout history across many different cultures and nations where people joined. So the idea that, well, you can only join if it's an ideology, you can only join if it's an idea, well, that's not true. That is simply not the case. A basic familiarity with any point in history will tell you that's not how it worked. So asserting that, well, we have to be an ideological country if anyone's ever going to be able to join, that's just not the case. And also, I would like to make it very clear, the ability of people to join the United States is not what makes it a good country or a moral country. Now, I think it is possible for people to join. I think it is possible for people to assimilate, but a very small amount of people, if any at all, over generations. It should not be some instantaneous thing. And it is not incumbent on the United States to be a place where everybody can join. Sorry, no. That's not how any other nation works. That's not how any other nation exists. And I'm sorry, but this aspect is not what makes America great. America is not made great by everybody's ability to join ideologically. And if that was the case, then you would simply be able to export that ideology to a foreign country, and it would be as great as the United States. It simply does not hold. There's too many factors involved. It is not just an idea.
Obviously, he thinks you can join it, which means that the idea is very much in contention. If what he means is like baseline patriotism, wave the flag, this land matters, it matters where I'm born and where I die, obviously agree. Obviously agree. And I assume that's what he means by that.
Again, I think he means a lot more than that. Hopefully that's clarifying for people. the problems with the propositional nation. I think the points that Ben was missing here. Again, I just thought this was interesting because across the spectrum, there are several different ways that JD Vance was opposed, but we saw this through line left and right about the problem of him approaching the nation as a real nation, as a real people, and not just a economic zone or a ideological community. And I think that the confusion from Ben here really underlies. And again, he's not openly hostile to Vance. That's not the issue. It's not like a leftist who's screaming at Vance the whole time about his racism and sexism or whatever. But the inability to kind of grasp Vance's point, or at least I know Ben's a pretty smart guy. I've got a feeling he knows what Vance was hinting at. But the fact that he's not addressing really what Vance was saying there, that's why I wanted to drill down into this, because I think it's important to go ahead and talk about what does make a nation. Because as we try to figure this out, as we try to heal, hopefully, after the defeat of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, then I think it's critical to be able to identify what binds us together and what will allow us to heal if that's going to be able to happen. All right, let's go ahead and move over to the questions of the people real quick here. Creeper Weirdo says, but if we're people, then we can't be an economic right zone and just freedoms all over the place. We can't have that. Yeah, I should have brought up also rights. Good point there, Creeper Weirdo, that it's not just the economic zone. It's also the rights zone. Once you pass into America, you get all these rights, and that's what makes you an American. Again, those things are not, that's not how it works. You don't suddenly obtain the rights by passing on to the magic dirt. The rights were something that the American people demanded due to a long history that was attached to a particular way that they lived their lives and a tradition. Should have gone into more explanation there. Tiny Stupid Demon says, the ancestors of all four of my grandparents settled in Western Virginia and North Carolina before the American Revolution. I look forward to nothing less than total hillbilly victory. Yeah, most of my family is from Tennessee and South Carolina, so I hear you. Let's see here. Roberto says, how could JD Vance care about a place and his family's place in it? What a weirdo, am I right? Yeah, that really does seem to be the consensus of people who were bringing charges against him. He's always trying to test me here. I can usually say this just fine. Perspicacious heretic. There we go. People change what ideas they believe all the time. The only thing that really doesn't change is where people live and where they tend to fight for. Again, this is so true, right? There's been large ideological shifts. I mean, just think about the shift between Tsarist Russia and Soviet Russia, right? That is literally the biggest revolution you can imagine, the most radical change from kind of this peasant farmer society attached to this long-standing czar, that structure, that feudal structure, into this kind of radical attempt at egalitarian modernization and centralization. But they were still Russians. I mean, obviously, Soviet Union extend beyond Russia, but you understand what I'm saying. Like they continue to be the same peoples, even though they radically changed their ideology. And this is my problem again with the ideology trying to define what a nation is. It simply does not make sense. It's an abstraction that was only really foisted upon the United States over and over again. Life of Brian says, is the GOP full of Vance? Does Shapiro go full Crystal? Like I said, I feel like Shapiro was not openly hostile to Vance here. Shapiro is a pretty traditional neoconservative. He has adjusted some of those opinions, I think, with the times, but he tends to have those beliefs. But he has shown a willingness to kind of adapt and move the direction that the party or the right is going to some degree. So he has all the objections you would think of Vance, but I don't think he's going to go full Never Trumper Crystal style. There's a lot of these guys who kind of tend to get nervous. They tend to act like they're going to bolt, but they always kind of come back to home base. And I feel that's kind of where Shapiro is on that. Joshua Beebe says, Ben Shapiro, the hero of the battle of, he knows what inspires men to war. Our intellectuals 8 cowards. Our warriors need a place at the table. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Ben is probably not a guy who's been involved in a lot of physical conflict. But to be fair, I've never served in the military, so I'm not here to rag on anybody for that. I would say that ultimately you are right, though, even though I am somebody who comes from obviously a little more of the intellectual bent. I do think that more often we need a warrior's understanding of certain scenarios. I think we do need more lions at the table. It should not just be it should not be foxes all the time. Life of Brian says Shapiro embodies the neocon paradox: pump patriotism cynically to push useless foreign wars. It was doomed. Now the woke push anti-patriotism to enlistees to destroy the nation, including the United States. Yeah, again, I think Shapiro is far more comfortable with foreign adventurism than I am. Certainly one of the things that he opposes Vance on, at least to some degree. And it is very clear that the United States military has shifted ideologically to promoting all kinds of things that attack the core of the American identity. I mean, we saw recently the DoD presentation where they were saying that pro-life groups are a problem. Why is the American military talking about domestic American politics and who might be an enemy of the state? There's only one reason for them to do that, and it's not good at all. Let's see. Elijah Timon says the Mexican-American War took place before World War II. Ben reveals that he considers the origin of America to be World War II, Cold War, kind of like progressives do. Yeah, I honestly, I think that is a fair point. There really is the post-war consensus that so many on the right have bought into. So many, especially those with a neocon bent, have kind of bought into, is the idea that history really began for the United States. Like, we had the revolution, and then it kind of just jumped to World War II. And that's where all of our identity and all of our principles were really founded. Let's see. Ronald McNugget says America should look at the U.S. government as subject nations looked at the USSR, as a hostile regime over them rather than identifying with and supporting it. There's a level of truth to that, though I will say this. I think that there are still factions inside the U.S. government, or I should say inside the wider American political complex, that do still care about the country and are still fighting for American well-being in a way that the Soviet Union probably did not have. I think you're right that as in general, people are too invested in the idea that the American government is actually serving the well-being of the American people. In many ways, it is not. But I would say, for instance, the left would not be going to the lengths it's going to basically like wipe out all of the choices that Americans had, both for the Democratic and Republican candidates, if there wasn't still some truth to the American system, some animating principle behind the government and elections. Otherwise they would just drop Joe Biden down a chute and put Donald Trump in prison. That'd be the end of it. Let's see here. Creeper Weirdo says, if the Propositional Nation meant I get to deport Destiny, then I'd agree. It doesn't. Though, so we'll need an actual nation. Sorry. An excellent point. An excellent point. The Heretic joins us. I just joined a gym, so now I'm suddenly in shape. Yeah, right. This same as I've crossed into the nation and said the words, and so now I'm suddenly an American. Joining the gym, just like stating American principles, is perhaps a good first step in your goal, but it is not sufficient. You'll put in a lot of time, a lot of work, if you want to make that happen. Joshua Beebe says, it's not that Ben doesn't understand, it's that his feelings don't care about the facts. Yeah, honestly, I kind of have to agree with that here. Again, I think he's a pretty intelligent guy. I don't think it completely escapes Ben what JD Vance is getting at here. I think he would just rather it not be the case, which, and he doesn't really want to explain why, because that would be a far more messy delve into, I guess, history and why he feels that way. But I don't want to speak in his place. Maybe he just genuinely didn't understand it. If he didn't, then great. Hopefully then this episode will clarify that for him and to be able to go ahead and make his decision from there. Phil says, we know why Benny is willing to trade away America for a few extra dollars, but Eric Erickson is the actual trader here, always willing to cut his own flesh and people off at the knees to benefit third world and libs. I really don't know a whole lot about Eric Erickson other than he's constantly just kind of touting old National Review neocon talking points. So I can't really speak a lot to Eric Erickson's past and everything he's believed in. I just know that whenever I encounter Eric Erickson, he's saying something that is very much the classic, like, we can just export democracy and maybe open borders are good for the country and maybe we should, fight every war we see out there. Talking points that are old, that are dead, that are no longer part, I think, of the right, thankfully. Uh, Points that have lost all of their real power on the right, which is a fantastic development, something I didn't know if I'd ever see in my lifetime, and I'm very happy to see as a positive movement in our direction. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to go ahead and make sure that you get all of these shows in your YouTube notifications, you need to go ahead and join, you need to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You need to click the bell. You need to turn on the notifications, because just because you subscribe doesn't mean YouTube thinks you actually want to watch the things you subscribe to. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts instead, you can go ahead and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, leave a rating or a review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. And of course, if you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can do so on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or your favorite local bookstore. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And as always, I will talk to you next time.